Maya Williams, the visionary CEO of Williams Innovations, strode purposefully through the marble halls of Central City Bank, the very place where history was often made and fortunes transformed, her every step echoing softly on the polished floor, a deliberate rhythm matching the pulse of the monumental day ahead. Today was the day she was meant to seal a $2 billion partnership that would propel her company into a new stratosphere of influence and innovation. A deal months in the making, negotiated with meticulous precision, and the culmination of years of sweat, sleepless nights, and unrelenting determination. Yet despite the grandeur of the moment and the mountain of achievements behind her, Maya carried with her a quiet, unshakable tension, an awareness born from a lifetime of encounters where her worth was questioned not for her intellect or vision but for the color of her skin and the shape of her identity. As a black woman CEO in a world that too often reduced her to stereotypes, doubts, or dismissals, the gleaming glass doors slid open, and the cool, conditioned air of the bank enveloped her like a promise of professionalism and opportunity. But also, unknowingly, a stage set for a different kind of test, one that had nothing to do with her business acumen or the sophisticated algorithms her company designed, but one that laid bare the raw and uncomfortable realities of subtle, systemic bias lingering beneath the veneer of civility. And as she approached the teller's counter, she noticed the murmurs, the brief sideways glances exchanged by a few staff and customers, eyes that flickered with surprise or uncertainty, as if her presence there was an anomaly in this temple of commerce. Yet Maya held her posture tall, shoulders squared and head held high, her sleek black suit tailored to perfection, a silent assertion that she belonged here as much as anyone else, perhaps more. She extended her hand and placed her finely embossed ID card on the counter, the gold letters of CEO shining against the black background, the hologram glinting in the light, a testament to years of climb and sacrifice. Yet the young bank teller, a woman barely out of college and seemingly uncomfortable in her role, barely glanced at the ID before her fingers closed over it. But instead of a careful exchange, her card was suddenly and inexplicably tossed onto the floor with a sharp, careless flick, the plastic hitting the marble with a muted but undeniable sound that seemed to reverberate through the space. The atmosphere thickening as time slowed and heads turned in disbelief, the silence growing heavy, eyes locked between the fallen ID and Maya's expression, which remained outwardly calm but behind which a storm was brewing. A complex swirl of shock, indignation, hurt, and an old, familiar fire. For a moment, Maya simply stood, letting the tension hang in the air, before slowly bending to retrieve her ID, her fingers steady despite the sting of the slight. And as she straightened, she realized that this moment was not about protocol or security measures. No, it was a sharp reminder that even in the most polished institutions, subtle prejudices lurked, poised to undermine and belittle. The invisible barriers she had battled all her life, manifesting in the smallest but most telling acts, the unspoken message that, despite her achievements and status, she was still seen through a lens clouded by bias. The teller's eyes avoided hers, darting nervously, perhaps sensing the weight of what had just transpired but unable or unwilling to acknowledge it, while other customers looked away, uncomfortable, complicit in the silence. Maya's heart sank momentarily, a pang of isolation cutting through her usual armor. But it was quickly replaced by a steely resolve. This would not be the day she was diminished, nor would it be the day she let prejudice derail her mission. Yet she knew that the challenge before her extended beyond the walls of the bank and the terms of a contract. It was a fight against a system reluctant to change, against the unspoken rules that made her journey far harder than it should have been. As she composed herself and prepared to move forward, she could not help but reflect on the long road who had brought her here, the countless moments of doubt she had crushed, the mentors who had believed in her when few did, the nights spent coding and strategizing, the sacrifices made and the battles fought in boardrooms where she was often the only woman, the only person of color, the persistent need to prove not just competence but exceptionalism to be taken seriously, a burden no one else bore. Yet today, despite the humiliation and the injustice, Maya was determined to rise above, to turn this moment of disrespect into a catalyst for change, knowing full well that the stakes were not only financial but symbolic, for herself, her company, and the generations of black women who would follow her path. The $2 billion deal hung in the balance. But so did something far greater, the fight for recognition, respect, and equality in a world that still struggled to see her as anything other than a threat or an anomaly. And so, with the weight of history on her shoulders but the fire of unyielding courage in her heart, Maya took a breath and moved forward, ready to confront not only the business challenges ahead but the subtle, pervasive forces that sought to hold her back, embodying the resilience, brilliance, and dignity that defined her as a leader, a black woman, and a pioneer. News of the incident, the simple but explosive moment when Maya Williams' CEO ID was thrown carelessly onto the floor by a bank teller, rippled quickly through the halls of Central City Bank and far beyond, carried on whispered conversations, hushed gossip among employees, and quiet but palpable shock in boardrooms and business circles alike, spreading like wildfire in an industry that prides itself on respect and professionalism but was now forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Inside Williams Innovations, Maya's closest advisors and executive team gathered in urgent meetings, their faces etched with concern and anger as they debated the best course of action, their frustration mounting not just over the disrespect shown to their leader but the larger implications it held for their company's future. With investors nervously scanning their portfolios, some calling Maya to express solidarity while others urged caution, fearful that the incident could jeopardize the multi-billion-dollar partnership painstakingly negotiated over many months, a deal that promised to catapult the company into unprecedented growth, innovation, and global reach. But despite Maya's relentless efforts to push forward, to assert that business must prevail above prejudice, the response from Central City Bank's upper management was maddeningly absent. No official apology, no attempt to engage directly with Maya or her team, just a deafening silence that echoed louder than any statement could, as if by ignoring the situation they could erase it. Yet in doing so, the bank only deepened the wound, exposing the fragile facades that masked a resistance to accountability and change. And internally, Maya grappled with a storm of emotions: frustration at the insult, sorrow for the years of subtle bias culminating in this public slight, and fierce determination not to let the moment define her or her company's destiny. Every call she made to the bank's executives went unanswered. Every email met with silence, and the negotiation meetings, once filled with promise, stalled into limbo, leaving her team in a state of limbo, unsure if the deal would ever be resurrected. While shareholders grew restless, their calls probing for explanations met only with vague reassurances, and public relations experts advised caution, fearing that a public fight might damage both parties' reputations. Yet Maya's leadership shone brightest during these dark days. Instead of retreating, she summoned her legal advisors and diversity consultants, preparing to confront the issue not only in boardrooms but potentially in the court of public opinion, recognizing that the incident was not an isolated one but a symptom of systemic bias, woven into the fabric of corporate institutions that had long excluded and diminished women of color, particularly in executive roles. She began to consider carefully how to tell her story, to frame the narrative in a way that highlighted not just the personal affront but the broader implications for equity and respect in business, knowing that the stakes were higher than dollars and contracts, that this was about setting precedents and opening doors for future generations. Throughout this time, the mood in Williams Innovations was electric. Her team, once cautiously optimistic, now bristled with righteous indignation, channeling their energy into initiatives supporting workplace inclusion and equity, eager to ensure that Maya's experience would spark real change rather than be swept under the rug. Meanwhile, the silence from Central City Bank allowed rumors and speculation to flourish, further eroding trust and damaging their own brand as calls for transparency and apology grew louder from advocacy groups and media outlets that caught wind of the story, painting the bank as an institution unwilling to confront uncomfortable truths. And as Maya wrestled with the financial loss of the deal slipping away, she found herself drawing strength from the solidarity of allies, other CEOs, activists, and thought leaders who rallied around her cause, transforming what began as a personal slight into a powerful movement demanding respect, fairness, and equality in the highest echelons of business. She reflected often on the irony that a partnership meant to represent progress and innovation was instead held hostage by an incident that epitomized the very obstacles she had spent her career fighting. But rather than weaken her resolve, the experience galvanized Maya's leadership and vision, compelling her to pursue a path that intertwined business success with social responsibility, recognizing that true leadership required not just profit but purpose. And as the months dragged on with the deal in stasis, Maya dedicated herself to preparing for a public reckoning, crafting speeches, participating in panels, and sharing her story on platforms that reached beyond the usual corporate circles, determined to make this moment a turning point, a catalyst for breaking glass ceilings and shattering the unspoken rules that had too long excluded women like her from the seats of power. And so, while the $2 billion partnership, the promise of new horizons and market dominance lay dormant in the shadows of silence, Maya's fight took on new life, rooted not in dollars but in dignity, equality, and the relentless pursuit of justice for herself and every black woman who dared to dream and lead, knowing that this battle, though costly, was necessary to build a future where respect was never again thrown on the floor. Months slipped by in a haze of uneasy quiet, with Central City Bank carefully orchestrating a public relations strategy grounded in deliberate avoidance, their executives and spokespeople tiptoeing around any direct acknowledgement of the incident involving Maya Williams's ID, their silence ringing louder than any apology could have, an unspoken admission of discomfort and unwillingness to confront the deeper issues exposed by the event. Yet while the bank chose to retreat into this cautious quietude, Maya forged a dramatically different path, one fueled not by bitterness but by a fierce commitment to transform pain into progress. To take the silence meant to silence her voice, and instead amplify it into a rallying cry that could no longer be ignored or contained. And so, stepping onto the stages of industry conferences and speaking platforms with a presence that commanded attention. She recounted her story with unflinching honesty, the humiliation of having her hard-earned identity dismissed, the sting of seeing her CEO credentials discarded as if worthless, and the broader systemic challenges that Black women leaders face in corporate America. Challenges rooted not in lack of talent or ambition but in the deeply entrenched biases that color perceptions and closed doors. And as her narrative unfolded, it became clear that this was no longer just about a stalled business deal or a single act of disrespect, but about a pervasive culture of subtle racism and exclusion that persisted within institutions that prided themselves on progress and innovation. Her words resonated deeply with audiences, sparking a wave of empathy, reflection, and solidarity that transcended industries and borders, inspiring other CEOs and entrepreneurs, many of whom had faced similar indignities and erasures, to come forward and share their experiences, breaking the silence that had allowed such prejudice to fester in the shadows. And as the movement gained momentum, Williams Innovations channeled the funds that might have fueled the lost $2 billion partnership into transformative initiatives aimed at creating tangible change, launching scholarships, mentorship programs, and leadership workshops specifically designed to empower young Black women entering the worlds of business and technology, providing resources, guidance, and community to those who might otherwise be overlooked or underestimated, while internally, the company's culture grew stronger, more inclusive, and reflective of Maya's vision for a future where success was not just measured in profits but in impact and equity. Meanwhile, the bank's continued silence began to speak volumes to the public and media alike, with commentators and advocates highlighting the institution's failure to confront its own prejudices and the consequences of choosing avoidance over accountability. The $2 billion partnership that once promised mutual growth and innovation quietly dissolved into history. But in its place rose a louder, more potent force, a silent protest that refused to be ignored. A movement that challenged entrenched norms and demanded systemic change, echoing far beyond the marble walls of Central City Bank and into boardrooms, legislative chambers, and communities nationwide. Maya's dignified resilience became a beacon, a testament to the power of turning personal affront into collective action. And as the conversations she ignited unfolded in corporate halls and on social media, a new awareness emerged, one that pressured institutions to rethink their policies, confront biases, and commit to genuine inclusivity, reminding the world that silence in the face of injustice is complicity, and that true leadership is measured not only by bottom lines but by courage, integrity, and the unyielding pursuit of justice for those too often marginalized and overlooked. Through every speech, every interview, and every program launched, Maya carried with her the weight of responsibility and hope that her experience, though painful, would serve as a catalyst for lasting transformation, opening doors wider for the next generation of Black women leaders and creating a business landscape where no identity would be discarded or dismissed. And in that hope, she found renewed purpose, proving that even when opportunities are lost, the fight for dignity and equality can never be silenced or sidelined. 2 years had passed since that fateful day when Maya Williams' CEO ID was thrown on the floor by a bank teller at Central City Bank, an incident that had rippled far beyond the marble walls and silenced boardrooms to ignite a movement for respect, equity, and systemic change in the business world. And during that time, Maya had transformed from a figure of quiet endurance into a beacon of leadership and resilience, speaking openly about the subtle yet persistent biases that Black women leaders faced and inspiring a wave of activism and corporate reform initiatives that resonated across industries and communities, while Central City Bank, after a long period of silence, internal reckoning, and shifting leadership, found itself at a crossroads, the weight of public scrutiny and evolving cultural demands forcing the institution to confront not only its past failures but the urgent need to rebuild trust and demonstrate genuine commitment to diversity and inclusion. It was in this climate that the bank's new CEO, a thoughtful and forward-looking executive who understood the gravity of the bank's missteps and the importance of making amends, reached out to Maya with a request for a meeting, signaling a readiness to engage not just in business but in honest dialogue and mutual transformation. And when Maya arrived for the meeting, the atmosphere was markedly different from that initial encounter years ago. Instead of cold dismissal, there was respect and openness, a recognition that the partnership between Williams Innovations and Central City Bank could not be rebuilt on financial terms alone but required a shared commitment to systemic change, transparency, and accountability. During the conversation, Maya laid out her vision clearly and with the authority of lived experience, explaining that this renewed partnership must extend beyond contracts and profit margins to include strategic investments in community programs aimed at empowering marginalized groups, especially young Black women aspiring to enter technology and business leadership, and the overhaul of the bank's internal policies to dismantle biases and foster an inclusive culture where diversity was celebrated and protected, not just tolerated. or to gayness, and she emphasized that this was not a favor or concession but a necessary foundation for sustainable success in a modern, socially conscious economy, a call that resonated deeply with the new CEO and the board members present, many of whom had witnessed the evolving demands of stakeholders in society and recognized that equity and respect were not optional but essential. After thorough discussions, the bank agreed to Maya's terms, committing to substantial investments in community initiatives, launching comprehensive diversity training programs, instituting transparent reporting mechanisms for equity goals, and creating leadership pathways for underrepresented employees, all promising a culture shift that went beyond lip service to measurable, accountable change. And with the details of the $2 billion partnership revived and strengthened by these commitments, the two leaders sealed the deal with a handshake that carried the weight of history, healing, and hope, a powerful symbol that a moment once marked by disrespect had been transformed into a catalyst for progress and unity, demonstrating that respect and equity in business are not only moral imperatives but strategic necessities for true and enduring success. As Maya left the meeting, she felt the profound significance of what had been achieved, not just for herself or her company but for every Black woman CEO who would walk the path after her, knowing that this new chapter was a testament to perseverance, courage, and the unyielding belief that change is possible even in the face of deep-seated challenges. And with the burden of history lifted and a brighter future unfolding before her, Maya stepped forward with renewed strength, ready to lead, not just a company but a movement toward a more just and inclusive world.